Hello students, today we are going to discuss caste and politics, a changing scenario. This unit would enable the students to understand caste as a social structure, caste and politics, alliance between caste and political parties, and politics of reservation. India undeniably is one of the most stratified societies in the world. Although social differences exist in other countries, what sets India apart is the existence of caste. In India, apart from the widespread economic disparity, caste, religion, and community differences are deeply etched in the psyche of the Indian people. Though the nature of caste and community interactions are changing over time, but the importance of ascriptive identity still remains important in both public and private domain. An arrangement of social order based on stratified system such as the caste rests upon the unequal distribution of power between status group having definitive position in the prestige hierarchy. In any social strata, the upper stratum face the problem of how to maintain their domination, which they and their ancestors at over a long period of time accumulated against the more socially disabled sections of the society. To maintain their position of superiority, the higher strata in the society must be able to control the corridors of power. The hegemonic control of power and position in society by the upper echelons is, however, a thing of the past because of the steady induction of caste into the domain of politics. The process of politics becomes one of identifying and manipulating the existing social order in order to mobilize, support and consolidate position. Where the caste structures provide one of the most important organization clusters in which the population is found to live, politics is likely to strive to organize through such an organizational cluster. To Kothari, the allegation of casteism in politics is no more or less than the politicization of caste. On the one hand, by drawing the caste system into the web of politics, political system finds the material for its articulation and molds it into its own design. And on the other hand, in making politics their sphere of activity, different caste groups gets a chance to assert their identity and strive for position. Politicians usually mobilize caste groupings and identities in order to organize their own power. Now we come to the idea of caste as a social structure. Caste is a hereditary endogamous kinship group ranked in terms of social and ritual status, linked by marriage and lineage, and for the most part locally identifiable, although the spread varies between different regions. Each caste has its distinctive rituals, attributes and mores, a traditional occupation and a particular position in the local hierarchy of the social strata. Caste structure is a pattern of social behavior in which groups and individuals are guided by prescribed set of norms, values and sanctions. The groups and individuals occupy specific status within and in relation with each other within the group. In this system, individuals are born into a particular caste and thereby acquire the role and status associated with that caste identity. Caste is an active reality in Indian society, which is highly flexible and has shown tremendous discrepancies from regions to region. The caste system divides the Hindu society into four orders, namely the Brahmins, who are the scholars or the priests, the Kshatriyas, the rulers or the soldiers, Vaishyas, the merchants, and the Shudras, who are the peasants and laborers. The system is also linked to the Varna model. The caste system is an all India phenomena, of which the Varna model provides an all India macro structure arrangement for the purpose of understanding this complex system. Srinivas states that the Varna scheme has certainly provided an inaccurate picture of the caste, but it also enables ordinary people to understand and evaluate the general place of a caste within this framework throughout the country. The sense of familiarity, even though based on distorted facts, leads to a sense of unity among people. Thus, the Indian or the Hindu society has been full of changes and improvisations, but these changes have been against the background of the Varna model. The Varna framework remains more or less constant, while castes vary from one region to another across the country. Now we come to caste and politics. India's independence in 1947 and the adoption of a democratic constitution in 1950 was justly seen as a remarkable achievement. As vigorous democratic participation and electoral competition became institutionalized, social scientists thought that explanation for the persistence of India as a democracy was an incredible achievement. Wiener situated these outcomes in the institutional success of the Congress Party, which incorporated pre-existing traditional social schemes, performing key roles in the process of mediation between citizens and the state. Thus, the unique stature and effectiveness of the Congress were rooted in continuing political activity that was associated with traditional pre-democratic norms, most notably patronage from the state through the party to groups embedded in the social structure. Further, Rudolph and Rudolph argued that the key elements of social structure, caste and specifically caste-based associations, represents the bulwark of rather than the hindrance to democratic practice. Thus, early characterization of Indian democracy represented a traditional form of patronage that provided resources to groups and supported democracy, but could also reinforce group based on hierarchies. As Congress declined and new political parties, particularly those representing themselves and the subaltern groups, emerged and started to compete effectively, these earlier characterizations of Indian politics became less compelling. Upper caste elites no longer completely controlled the state apparatus, and various communities increasingly looked to their own political leaders, from farmers to film stars, to shape policy and provide key goods and services. In contrast to earlier scholarship, Chibber argued that in the absence of formal associations and given the powerful influence of the state in Indian democracy, political parties themselves could construct politically relevant social cleavages through unmediated relationship with client population and thus transform the party system at the state level. This argument explained critically important phenomena during this period, such as the collapse of the Congress Party in the Uttar Pradesh heartland in the 1990s, because its catch-all policy, reliant on old patronage network, was eclipsed by the formation of new coalition based on caste and religious cleavages that polarized the electorates. Further, India had inherited from the British Raj provinces borders that were questionable so far as cultural coherence was concerned. Most of them had been divided arbitrarily and gathered together several linguistic groups. Though the demand for linguistic reorganization of the state spelled out primarily in cultural terms, linguistic communities asked for homogeneous entities for the sake of communication and education. It was mostly articulated in the dominant caste, which had spread throughout the area or domain of one vernacular language. As a result of the redrawing of the Indian map on linguistic terms, for example, Marathas became dominant in Maharashtra. However, most states, there were usually two or more dominant castes. In Andhra Pradesh, Kammas and Reddis were locked in some rivalry. Similarly, in Karnataka, the caste of Vokalingas and Lingayats were opposed to each other. After the redrawing of the state boundaries, these castes often tended to align themselves with one party. For instance, the Kammas opted for the Communist Party of India, while the Reddis favored the Congress. None of the castes associated with political parties, however, vote en bloc for one party. For example, 59% is far less than 100%. There are many reasons why so many chose to vote for a party not identified with their own caste. First, in some constituencies, two parties or more might have nominated a candidate of the same caste, a common practice in constituencies where inter-caste fractionalism is pronounced. Second, citizens may choose a party which is not only associated with their caste simply because they like it. Since governance related issues do influence voting. Third, factional parties play a significant role within the caste group, especially at the local level. Fourth, as James Manner pointed out, shrewd politicians constantly engage, often simultaneously, in effort to divide social groups, including Jati and Jati clusters that oppose them, and to unite those that offer them support. One of the techniques used by these politicians to divide voters, which they know are not supportive, consists of promoting and financing dummy candidates of the same caste as the main rival. But the general pattern of voting behavior in India suggests that as recently as 2009, caste or community continues to be the primary building block of political affiliation at the micro level. Indeed, there are many states in which the majority of caste group aligns itself to one party. This is truer in states where two-party system is well entrenched. In Rajasthan, 74% of the Brahmins, 59% of the Jats and 55% of the Rajput voted for the BJP, while 66% of the Dalits voted for the Congress. In Punjab, 58% of the upper caste Hindus voted for the Congress and 36% of them voted for BJP and its Sikh ally, the Shiromani Akali Dal. In Bihar, the Yadavs continued to vote for the RJD of Lalu Prasad Yadav, whereas the upper caste stuck to the BJP and its state ally, the JDU. Now we come to the caste and its alliances with political parties. According to Rudolph and Rudolph, within the new context of political democracy, caste remains a central event of Indian society even while adapting itself to the values and methods of democratic politics. Caste in India has not declined in everyday significance. However, its manifestation has completely transformed from what it was originally theorized as a Hindu philosophy. That is, what is lost in orthodoxy, it has evolved in orthopraxy. It has entered and thrived in the political arena with separate political parties representing one or more caste or caste groups, that is, ethnic parties. Further, ascriptic voting is a viable strategy for both the voter mobilization for elites and representation for voters. The mobilization and construction of caste as political identities have created an efficient grouping mechanism without real ideological significance, much like ethnic interest groups. Another factor for the alliance between caste and political parties is the instrument of affirmative action. Since its inception in India, which is not exclusively reserved educational and occupational opportunities, it has also embraced an emancipation agenda by reserving political representation for scheduled caste and tribes, among other minorities. Some may argue this provision in itself is a reason for the politicization of caste and, by extension, affirmative action. In fact, politicization of caste is a motive for elites and a rational path for voters. It makes instrumentally rational sense to voters and elites to mobilize as caste identities. This theory lies on the logic of politicians being obliged to their voters for election and re-election in democracies. Kanchan Chandra's research points out that in an ethnically divided context like India, both instrumental as well as expressive voting is indeed on the basis of caste. Caste is used as a heuristic, low information setting to favor co-ethnic for delivering on promises, resulting in a self-enforcing and reinforcing equilibrium of ethnic favoritism. The alliance between caste and politics can be understood in the context of the advantages that electoral politics has to offer to the plebeians. At the local level, especially in the rural context, opinion leaders who are better educated than the average peasants help to shape collective form of voting behavior, as James Manner pointed out in his study of the 1980 elections. But members of one caste also decide to vote together for one party or candidate without any hesitation because they share not only the same identity but also the same interest. According to Paul Brass, members of the same caste often carefully calculate how their votes may best serve their collective advantages within any given constituency, and they tend to merge with other castes in order to achieve that goal. The concept of collective bargaining can be understood by focusing on the lower caste and their voting behavior, as they form the bulk of the voters and generally tend to have higher turnouts than the average. Mukulika Banerjee, in her ethnographic work in West Bengal, persuasively argues that elections offer them an opportunity for the expression of citizenship and for an understanding of the duties and rights involved in living in a democracy. Banerjee emphasized that the egalitarian mechanisms of the poll afforded them particular pleasures. Therefore, there are three consequences of such interaction between caste and political parties. 1. Caste members, particularly poor and marginalized, who previously remained untouched by the political process, got politicized and began to participate in electoral politics with an expectation that their interest would be served. Second, caste members get split among various political parties, weakening the hold of caste. Third, numerically large caste groups get represented in decision making, and the strength of the traditionally superior caste gets weakened. This explains the rise of the middle and backward caste representation in most of the state assemblies. Now we come to the understanding of politics of reservation. When the Indian Constitution provided reservation for the scheduled caste and tribes, it also added that in due course of time, similar reservations or active help of the state will be provided to other backward communities. The population of these so-called backward caste is difficult to estimate, and the figure ranged from 25% to 52% of the total population of the country. In terms of their social and economic standing, they are placed between the traditional elite castes such as the Brahmins, Baniyas, Kshatriyas, Rajput and other lower caste, and the SCs and STs. The upper caste are about 15% of the population, the SCs roughly 17%, the STs make up 7% or so, and the backward caste makes the rest of the population. These backwards are now known as other backward caste and in general comprise largely peasant and other agrarian communities. These castes are not untouchables, but are generally considered backward because of their lack of cultural learning and on account of their low peasant status. In an effort to help this caste, the Constitution of India recommended that the state intervene and help these communities by legislating some measures that would break the cycle of poverty so far as these backward castes are concerned. In pursuance of Article 340 of the Constitution, the Kalkar Commission in 1955 was constituted, but it could not come up with a satisfactory conclusion as to who should be legitimately considered as the backward communities. The Mandal Commission came into existence in 1980 and it promptly came up with a long list of 3,743 backward castes on the basis of their social, economic and educational backwardness. The Mandal Commission's recommendation were implemented in 1990 by the then Prime Minister V.P. Singh. That meant that further seats in educational institution and government job would be reserved for the OBCs. Bital's criticism of Mandal Commission recommendation is noteworthy. He distinguishes between reservation for OBCs following Mandal recommendations and the reservations that were already granted in the Constitution for the scheduled caste and tribes. All the provisions of scheduled caste and tribes were with the intention of reaching greater equality. The reservation for OBCs were really to bring about a balance of power on the calculus of caste. The kind of deprivation that the untouchables and the Adivasis encountered for some centuries in no way can be compared to the traditional conditions of the OBCs. In fact, the Mandal recommendation were actually giving into a powerful rural lobby that did not really care about the equality of opportunity as much as it did for equality of results. Thus, according to Gupta, the Mandal recommendation are not out to explicate caste, but to represent caste, and thus make this ascriptive identity a perennial political resource to be flogged in perpetuity in Indian politics. With this, we come to the conclusion of our discussion. Caste factor is a constituent of Indian political system. Some of the political parties have direct caste bases, while others indirectly bank upon the particular caste groups. However, from the above discussion, it becomes clear that all members of one caste never vote together because of factionalism, dummy candidate, and the growing importance of issue-related politics at the expense of identity politics and patronage democracy. Different caste groups identify with different political parties which reflect the quest for status-related recognition and quota-oriented mobilization are articulated in class terms. Therefore, voting behavior was bound to largely flow from not just political and economic consideration, but also from these societal patterns. Therefore, politicization of caste has resulted in direct electoral negotiations between political entrepreneurs and their voters. Thank you.